The latest update from NHC has Laura a tropical storm now. So just minutes ago it was downgraded. Got 65 miles an hour wind in there, 988 millibars, and moving to the north at about 13 knots. And there's the remainder of that track. It is going to be changing over to a tropical depression and gradually becoming an extratropical cyclone as it moves off the east coast. Some incredible winds reported at Lake Charles last night. It's a wonder that the station actually held together. They were reporting 120 at 78 knots, gusting to 115, which is 90 miles an hour sustained, gusting to 132 miles an hour. And this is around the time that the eye passed just to the west. They were in the eye wall. And you can see the atomized rain producing what the instrument thought was fog. But of course it was rain there. And then as it passed, looks like it destroyed some of the equipment. The wind observation stopped. And then the pressures started a very slow rise. The winds did manage to knock out the radar at Lake Charles, 12:53 a.m. last night, and there's the last frame we received. Radar located right there in the eye wall, coming inland right there. And the base velocity, you can see the very high wind speeds, 138 knots inbound, heading towards the radar, and then on the other side, 132 knots outbound. So we're talking easily in the 150 mile an hour range. And that's about 1,000 feet off the ground where that's measured. I did go through the radar messages and nothing has been posted. So I assume that they're still checking out the damage and trying to find out what's wrong. And plotted out on a map, there it is, the 132 mile an hour wind gust at Lake Charles, and then we had a corridor of 80s going all the way up towards Fort Polk and Alexandria, Louisiana. And we can see that there was not very much impact into Texas, especially Jasper. 34 knots is all that they got. And the high-resolution rapid refresh last night, it was bringing that wind field into much of Texas, and that did not pan out. However, the wind estimates in Louisiana and all the way to the Mississippi River, those were fairly accurate. So this is a model I would use again, although I would certainly use a bit of caution. Here's what we're expecting for the rest of the day. This is from the 12Z run. Based on this, I would probably be careful about the extent of this wind field here, but it does look like we have a corridor going up from Monroe, maybe up to Memphis a little later this afternoon. And Memphis, according to this, wind gusts up to 40 to 50 miles an hour are possible. For this afternoon, we're seeing Tropical Storm Laura moving into Arkansas now, entering the southern counties around El Dorado. There it is right there, and that should take a track on up towards the Memphis area. It does look like the high winds are going to be concentrated mostly along the right side of that track, so eastern and southeastern Arkansas still under the gun for some damaging winds. And of course there could be some scattered problems elsewhere around Arkansas, Mississippi, and far eastern Tennessee. Elsewhere, well, now we've got tropical air in place all the way from Texas out to the southeast U.S., and we're starting to see the appearance of the dry line out on the Caprock and the high plains. Dew points are in the 70s across much of Texas all the way up to Oklahoma City and Wichita, and we should start getting back into that pattern, especially due to the high pressure, Bermuda High being over the Carolinas, and low pressure out over West Texas there. So that's going to give us a gradient out of the south and bring some onshore flow into the south after the tropical storm passes east. And there's our latest satellite imagery showing Laura heading up in Arkansas. And that's where we're at right now. And dry sector pushing on into the hardest hit areas of Louisiana. We should see an improvement in the weather over the next 6 to 12 hours. And most of the impacts are going to be along a corridor, kind of like that right there. Up in the northeast U.S., got a frontal system in the Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ontario area. That's produced some thunderstorms in the Green Bay area, moving down the coast into western Michigan. And we can see that line of convection right there. And out ahead of the surface low, we've got a warm front, and that's producing some thunderstorms south of Albany towards Kingston and back into the Catskills. Ahead of that, you can see the low clouds, classic stratocumulus, altocumulus field with that lift out ahead of the warm front. And down to the south, this is where we have the moist sector. So still a possibility for storms in the Appalachians down to West Virginia due to surface heating. And then, of course, we're going to get the remains of Laura crossing over the next 24 to 36 hours. So rain chances will go up in Virginia and West Virginia and adjoining areas. The surface map for the northeast reflecting that frontal system there. There's that frontal low and very strong warm front. You can see those 50s off to the east. Very humid, warm conditions to the west. Yeah, that's going to be a good recipe for severe weather. And we can see that SPC has a tornado watch in effect. There's only an enhanced risk out for this area. Now, if you want to get some background on these watches, one thing you can do is look for the mesoscale convective discussion. That's going to be under here. So we click that and go up to that little area in New York, and we get kind of a more meteorological discussion. They're talking about elevated storms transitioning into surface-based as the heating ramps up. It appears that when they issued this, their main concern was bowing segments and outflow. Tornado also possible due to the very moist boundary layer, which means low LCLs, and strong 0 to 3 kilometer shear. So, we can take a look at that. Let's do that. Now, probably a good place to start is going to be the dew point chart. Now, keep in mind that the surface low is about right there. The warm front is going to be pretty much along the leading edge of that moisture. And we can see a difference in the wind. See the westerly winds right there around Binghamton down to Scranton. And out ahead of it, kind of a more light and variable appearance. Now, one thing I like to do is look along these boundaries and look for evidence of a mesolow. And yeah, I do see one right there. See that right there? So that's going to be south of Albany. And let's check out the development of that little mesolow. See that right there? Good convergence. And feeding in a little wedge of moisture. Let's sample that real quick. Bring up the skew-t there. And that gives us a kind of a proximity sounding. You can see the distinct lack of capping, so we're going to get numerous cells as this goes up. And what we see here is some very impressive 0 through 1 kilometer shear, and there's that curvature that we always look for. So that in itself, that would be a good indicator for tornadoes for sure. And you can see the algorithmic hazard type going for tornadoes. The STP also elevated quite a bit, up to 3 there, and that puts any tornadoes more likely to be in the EF3 range. So that in itself is pretty significant. And then we look over here, and we can see the contributors, the SRH being a huge contributor. Also, the LCL is pretty favorable. CAPE is favorable, bulk wind difference. So a lot of good factors. Now, of course, as I mentioned, the big problem that I see is the lack of capping. I don't know, there's a little bit of capping right there. Now I do see the D-cape is kind of low, so maybe outflow is not going to be much of a problem. So let me poke around here, make sure I'm not in a convective cell there in the numerical model. Yeah, that looks better. 500 cape. Yeah, that's probably more of a representative parcel. I'm still seeing the strong 0 through 1 kilometer helicity. And let me bring that down towards Poughkeepsie. And very similar pattern. And yeah, I'm starting to see that capping. This is these are some pretty good parameters there for New York. You don't see this very often in that area. 900 D-cape. So at this point, it's going to come down to now casting that area. It looks to me like 18Z, 19Z, that favorable area will probably shift there into Connecticut and Massachusetts. Visible satellite. See how things are progressing there. So cells moving west-northwest to east-southeast, and they are numerous. They are fast-moving also. So yeah, I would probably look for the possibility of some of these to strengthen quite a bit. So there's the current radar in that area. Big problem is that there are numerous cells, so that means we're going to have a shared cold pool. And it's going to be kind of difficult for one cell to become severe. The exception is where it's kind of out ahead of the line, like that cell right there. Also, that cell right there, there's some possibility for that. So those are some areas you would watch if you are forecasting in this region. So pretty much anywhere from there towards south of Kingston to Poughkeepsie, there's some severe weather potential in that region. And I would probably start looking out ahead of that towards Hartford and central and north Connecticut. We start out the morning with some pretty strong storms in southeastern Montana, moving into the Dakotas, and there they are. They look a little bit elevated. It is kind of early in the convective day still. And it looks like we're getting a little bit of upper air support coming in from the west. Now it looks like our main polar front is well to the south. However, we do have kind of an upslope pattern. You can see those high dew points in South Dakota. Wind flow out of the southeast and what looks like some pressure falls up in Montana. Also, outflow boundaries from this morning's convection. So it's possible we're going to see a repeat of this stuff later this afternoon. And that brings us back to the southwestern U.S. Moisture is coming up in the Phoenix and Tucson area, back up to 60, so we're probably going to be seeing the return of some monsoon thunderstorms in that region. There's the dry line we mentioned earlier, and then we've got what looks like a kind of a late season, or should say early season, frontal system there in the Salt Lake City area, some gusty winds at Wendover, and northwest winds at Tonopah. That all spells cold front. So that's moving southeast, and most likely it's going to stall somewhere in this area and maybe generate some thunderstorms every evening, especially up on the mountains. And there's our satellite at this hour. Storms starting to go up on the higher elevations. And checking out the possible position of the subtropical high. I don't know, it looks to me like it's still in the Four Corners area. I'm seeing these anvils moving towards the east and kind of a very slight tendency maybe towards the west down to the south. So the subtropical high going to be probably in that region right there. Now I do think we should look at the water vapor. Let me see if we can pull that up. Yeah, this is interesting. Looks like some residual moisture in the upper levels, pretty much co-located with that subtropical high. And then down over Texas, some very strong subsidence across that area. And there, yeah, we do see some patchy 40s and 50s dew points in the Intermountain region there, back towards almost the Great Basin. So no wonder we have storms going up every evening. And down to the south, looks like a lot of moisture down around Ajo. And you can see those higher precipitable water amounts working their way up to the Vegas area, and they're about to get into their monsoon season very shortly. And here's the convective precip for today. Yep, a lot of scattered thunderstorms throughout Arizona. And I'm sure they can use the rain out in that region. Okay, that's about all I got for this edition of Forecast Lab. Thank you for joining. Thank you to our new Patreon supporter, KW. Your support is greatly appreciated. Have a great Thursday afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.